Right. Well, folks, we are blessed to have a man named Chris Setla who's going to share his story with diabetes today. Chris, welcome to Beat Diabetes.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's a blessing to have you. And Chris, I wanted to share your story. There was two or three different things in your story that I wanted to share. One is the fact that you're a little different from some of the testimonies I've shared because you never went way beyond the boundaries of diabetes. You just kind of tiptoed across the boundary and then started backing your way the other direction, which is a smart thing to do. But there are several other things I wanted to talk about. I want to start with your career. You're retired now, but you were a mail carrier, right? Tell us a little bit about that. You did it for a lot of years and you walked a lot of miles, as we would say, or kilometers, as you Canadians would say.
Yes, that's for sure. I started back in 1983 and doing the quick calculations, I came to the fact that I must have walked around the equator 3 times in my career in the 30 years that I worked. I averaged about 4,500 kilometers a year towards the end of my career as a letter carrier. And unlike American letter carriers, we didn't have trucks until the last 5-10 years. Everything was done on foot.
Yeah, you remind me of my boyhood days where the mailman, as we called him, would just walk from house to house with a big old pack on his back with all the letters. I've got a son who's a letter carrier these days, and he drives a truck. But of course, when he comes to certain businesses and places, he'll have to hop out of his truck and take them. But you put in a lot of effort. The reason I think that's significant is that there are some people who believe that the total solution for diabetes is just exercise and move a lot. If anybody should not ever have had diabetes, it would be you, because you moved more than almost anybody apart from an athlete, right?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. In fact, I had a doctor once who kind of poked me in the middle and said, "You're getting kind of pudgy. Maybe you should go for a walk after supper." And I said, "Do you think that'll work?" And he said, "Oh yeah, you're a letter carrier. Never mind. Just don't quit your day job."
That is funny. So yeah, the saying is you can't outrun a bad diet. You can't out exercise a bad diet. So you were a bit overweight throughout those days of your walking around as a letter carrier, right?
Ever since I was born, I think. My earliest memories of kindergarten, I was already called fatso. So I've always struggled with it.
Yeah. Did you ever try seriously to fight it, or did you just feel like this is my destiny in life?
Well, I tried to fight it a few times, but I'd have a small victory and then I would just fall right back off the wagon and gain weight again. My favorite foods were things like potatoes, French fries, potato chips, chocolate bars. I pretty much lived on it.
Yeah. So while you were a letter carrier, you weren't at that diabetic level. I'm guessing you were probably pre-diabetic at some point, but you didn't quite cross that line during your career. Is that right?
That's right. Actually, I was diagnosed as pre-diabetic in 2016. And that would have been probably about the time when I stopped walking. I worked 2 years inside a plant. I had an office and did some other paperwork kind of thing. And that was really bad for me because after walking all those miles, you got used to being able to eat whatever you wanted, whenever you wanted, and it wouldn't really make a whole lot of difference of your weight. But the minute I stopped walking, I had to stop eating.
And you didn't really stop eating, though, right?
No, not the right foods anyway. I did. The wife and I, we did dabble in an Atkins diet at one time, probably about 15 years ago, and I managed to lose quite a bit of weight. But then you lost all the weight, and you thought, "Oh well, what's one potato chip?" It's I can have a little treat, and then that little treat became 2 little treats, and then 4 and 6, and before you know it, I was back up to my almost 290 pounds.
Okay, so not far from 300 pounds. Now let's
Nope.
talk about your diagnosis of being pre-diabetic. Did that scare you, motivate you, or did you just say, "Well, at least I'm not totally diabetic"?
Yeah, exactly. That's the way I saw it. If the doctor told me I was pre-diabetic, that means watch that sugar and, otherwise carry on. And
Yep.
so that's what I did. Had I known then what I know today, it would have been an entirely different story.
Yeah. So you went several years at that level, and then eventually you did cross the line. And one other thing I wanted to kind of touch on while we're doing this interview is you had an experience similar to me at some point in your life, which is you were having natural hypos. You were getting all lightheaded, feeling like you might pass out, not because you were taking insulin, but it was just your pancreas was kind of overreacting. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Well, that started just after I started working for Canada Post as a driver. I was only part-time, and we had the habit of everybody would get together about an hour before our start in the afternoon, and we'd be in the cafeteria, and we'd order, well, being young guys, we didn't have much money, so we'd order a plate of French fries or something like that, and that was some ketchup and a Coke, and we didn't think anything of it, and hour and a half later, I'm pulling into my first stop, and I'm starting to cold sweat, dizzy, not feeling well. So I figured I must be running low on blood sugar. So I just picked up another Coke and a candy bar and went back and sat in the truck until went over. I never bothered talking to a doctor about it, but it sounded exactly like what you had. And so I'm happy I finally found out what was causing it.
Yeah, well, and I was telling you when we talked earlier, no doctor. Of course, I didn't see a lot of doctors, but I did see a couple, and they couldn't really tell me what was going on either. It was only after I started testing myself, I realized that the reason my blood sugar would drop so low, where I felt, as you described, like you're about to pass out and you're lightheaded and all that, the reason it was dropping so low was because at a couple of hours earlier, it was so high and my pancreas was overreacting, over-responding, and then I was being flooded with insulin, my own insulin. A lot of people think the only way you'll get a hypo is if you take insulin, but you can get a natural hypo. That's what I call them, and your own pancreas will do it to you. You are having that, which is not diabetes, but it is a precursor. It means your metabolic system is not working all that well. So you're diagnosed with pre-diabetes. You don't take it that seriously. Try to make a few adjustments maybe. And then at a certain point, the doctor says, well, you've got the real deal. Tell us about that.
Yes, I went for a general exam last year I guess it was May in 2022. And my blood tests came back, and the doctor said, well, you're diabetic, you're 6.6, and too bad, so sad, and well, you just I don't think it's enough to bother medicating yet, she said, but we really need to watch it. And that's when I started watching YouTube. I ran across Dr. Fung, Dr. Barry, what's the third one there? He calls himself the carb addiction doc, which actually plays very strongly into my feelings.
Siwes?
Pardon me?
Is it Siwes, Dr. Siwes?
Yes, Dr. Siwes.
Yeah.
And actually, that is my problem. I'm addicted to it. It's, once I start, I can't stop. I just keep eating and eating. I was never much into cakes or cookies or things like that, but the French fries and the potato chips and those sorts of things, that got me, and I could eat them by the truckload.
Yeah. And you were carrying a lot of weight at that time. And so it's kind of interesting to me. The pre-diabetes diagnosis didn't do much for you. But boy, once you found out you had real diabetes, according to the numbers, you suddenly got motivated. You're on YouTube, you're watching this guy, you're watching that guy, you're making some changes. I guess just the word diabetes, take away the pre, was kind of scary for you.
Yes, it was. And I lost my wife 2 years ago as well, and she had had 3 strokes, and I had taken care of her for a year and a half with limited abilities that she had, and now at this point, I'm by myself. I have no children. I have no relatives in this country, and there's nobody to take care of me. So I figured I'd better be careful and try to get this sorted out. And that's where I ran into your channel, and I realized there is hope. And just keep watching what I do.
Yeah. So it sounds like it did not take too long before you figured out what you needed to do, which was cut those carbohydrates. And I think you're now eating 2 meals a day. How's that going for you?
Actually, I'm down to 1 meal most days.
Okay.
And that's just not by choice. That's just, I don't feel like eating. I don't feel like eating. Once you really eliminate the carbs, the hunger pains seem to go away. But it took a long time. From the time I was diagnosed as diabetic to I could get down below, what was it? I think I had 6.7 almost 9 months afterward, and then finally it started to drop down. But
yeah, I wanted to focus on that because some people get depressed when I share a story of somebody who's up to a 12 A1C and they dive down to 5 point something in 4 months, and they're like, well, it's not working that way for me. Did not work that way for you. It took some time, and for about 7 months or so, it didn't even look like this whole process and program was working for you at all, but you stayed with it.
Well, I pretty much figured I had to stay with it because there is no other source of blood glucose than carbohydrates, really. I doubted very seriously my liver was trying to do me in. And so I just stuck with it. I saw small victories, but they were very small, and did a lot of testing with Mike the meter, and I could see it go down, but mornings were high. Anytime during the day, it never seemed to drop that much, but I could see it dropping, so I figured I better just stick with it, and eventually it did. And now I measure in millimoles, so I don't really know what it would be in milligrams per deciliter, but I have been down as low as 4.2, and that's almost getting scary low to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't feel bad, and so I'll take it. And that's why I was so upset when my last A1C came back at 5.1, because I figured, well, it should have been lower than that. I've been down in the 4s for a lot of time. But I guess that's the way it is. It's over a long period of time, so you have to give it a few months to clear out the old stuff and bring in the new.
Yeah. So just to make this clear to folks, you were as high as 6.7, which is just barely over the line, really. But for at least 6 or 7 months, you couldn't seem to hardly make any progress. And then at a certain point, you dove down to 5.1. How long did it take to go from that 6.5, 6.6 down to 5.1 once you kind of broke through that wall?
Well, it seemed to go quickly the last few months, but in total, it would have taken me about, I started in May last year, so it's June now, so 12 and a half months. But I never really saw any huge success until about 3-4 months ago. That's when I actually saw it come down to normal. And I was talking to my doctor, and she said, well, there's this thing called quality of life. She said, you should allow yourself some carbs now and then because you don't want to live a miserable life. And I said, well, to me, it's a lot more miserable to live without my toes or my eyesight than it is to live without a piece of birthday cake. So I pretty much stuck to my guns, and I'm happy. It's nice not to be run by my addictions for carbohydrates. I can take it or leave it. I know I'm going to eat sometime today, so that's all I need to know. So what?
Well, I would agree completely. And a lot of times they talk about quality of life. Well, what kind of a quality of life do you have when you're going in and out of the hospital with all kinds of procedures needed, and you're just having all kinds of issues, and eventually, like you said, amputations and so forth. So You did not set a record for being the fastest guy to get down. You didn't set a record for being the guy that jumped from 12 down to 5, but you made wonderful progress. I would imagine at this point, you made at least a semi-believer out of your doctor. Was she not happy to see you down at 5.1?
Well, she's happy. She says, you worked really hard at this. But it was no amazement. She just seemed to shrug it off a bit. But I don't mind her. She may be stuck in this doing what the medical association says, but she doesn't argue with me when I show her these not surveys, what do you call them, medical research papers that I've read, and I said, here, right. I've done my homework. This is what I'm coming to. And she just says, okay. And
well, we have to give her credit. She at least didn't fire you. I've heard from people that the doctor just fired him, said, well, you can't be my patient anymore because you're not complying with my instructions. So she hung in there with you, and now she's seen results and you've seen them, and I don't know how happy she is, but you're definitely happy. So there's a lesson here. I'm kind of thinking about the old story about the tortoise and the hare, right? You know that story. And so you may be more like the tortoise, but you reached a great finish line of 5.1. You said you were a little disappointed with that, but I tell you what, that is not shabby at all.
No, I realize that. And I just have to, remind myself that, you know what, that's pretty darn good. So don't worry about it. But I think the patience part came back from letter carrying. I frequently during the winters here in Winnipeg, temperatures can get down to close to minus 40 Celsius, which is the exact same thing in Fahrenheit. It's minus 40. So, and I would have customers say, how do you survive out how do you do your job in this cold? And I said, it's very simple. You put one foot in front of the other and you repeat as necessary until you see your back door. That's really all there is to it. If you stop and start thinking about how cold it is, you will never survive. You'll just freeze to death. So that's what I've always done.
That's a great lesson, my friend. Well, Chris, that is a tremendous story for all of us. I know you're going to be an encouragement. You seemed a little hesitant about being interviewed. You said, well, I guess if I can help at least one person. Well, I'll tell you what, you're going to help a lot more than one person. So thank you for sharing your story. And perseverance is sometimes all it takes. Some people write and say, well, I've been doing this for a month and a half, 2 months, and I'm not seeing any results. Well, you did it 7 months. And you aren't hardly seeing any results, but boy, you sure did at the end. So within 12 and a half, 13 months, you saw a major victory. There are people in their 30s and 40s that don't have an A1C like you do, and they're not even fully diabetic, but they're not as good as you. So you've made wonderful progress. Thank you so much, Chris, for sharing your story with Beat Diabetes.
I'm happy to do it, and I hope it helps somebody else to realize that it may take a little longer than a week or two to beat diabetes.
The question that so many people have about us is how in the world did you guys get to know each other? How did you get together? Well, the answer is found in Benedicta's new autobiography, When Destiny Calls. In fact, we do something in that autobiography that is almost never done. We each have a chapter sharing from our own perspective how we got together and how we first got to know each other. So she tells her side of it, I tell my side of it, and then it goes on with the rest of her autobiography. And the whole autobiography is exciting. It's a lot of drama and a lot of good stuff. But I think you'll find it interesting to know how it was that God brought us together. So there'll be a link in the description about how you can get this book on Amazon, either as an ebook or a paperback.